Hi, my name is Lindsay Assis. I am the project coordinator here at AI for Good, and I am here with Anand Sampat. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Great, thank you so much. And he has created the podcast Doing Well by Doing Good. It's also a newsletter. And would you mind telling our community a little bit about your podcast and what you guys usually talk about?
Sure. So Doing Well by Doing Good is a newsletter and podcast highlighting the high growth VC-backed social enterprises building sustainable businesses through products and services that deliver social good from day one. As an example, we're not talking about a company like Salesforce, right? Although they do a lot of really awesome stuff, we're talking about companies that directly provide a service that does social good. For example, a company that might provide wasted food that companies are providing to nonprofits, right? So we're focused on the social enterprises that build a product or service that do that social good.
That's amazing. I think that's a really creative and helpful area to be studying. What made you want to start this podcast and newsletter?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually so I'm an AI engineer by training, uh, and that's why I was really excited to talk to you and the community at AI for Good. I think what you guys do is really awesome. I actually had built a company before where we were helping data scientists be more effective. We ended up joining forces with a larger AI company where I now work called One Concern, which does AI for natural disasters, and is certainly doing AI for good. And what I realized was there was a lot more passion and inspiration when you come every day with this social mission, right? And that inspiration was really what kind of triggered me to say, well, I love working at One Concern. It's such a great place because I know that everybody there is motivated by the same mission. Social good is something that everybody can get behind. But it's also a high growth business that's looking to be extremely profitable. And so, I thought about this and I said, well, One Concern can't be the only company that does this. And there's certainly a lot of people who want to work for companies like that, or build their own companies like that. And so, out there, I had seen a lot of, and I listened to a lot of great podcasts and thought leaders that talk about, Silicon Valley, high growth, VCs, how do you become a unicorn, right? And then likewise, there's a lot of really great stuff around social good, right? How do you, do a social enterprise? How do you, make a nonprofit, for example? How do you, help people or do something that helps the environment, right? And there's a lot of great podcasts around that as well. So what I found was that there wasn't really this combination. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to focus on that combination, right? How do you find these, what we call doing well by doing good companies who successfully merge the two, making them much more sustainable, right? So somebody that is providing a business that directly contributes social good through the product or service means that as they make more money, and as they're becoming more and more profitable, they're actually doing more social good just by that. Right? They don't need to say that, hey, I'm going to make a 1% pledge or something like that. They can do good simply by continuing to do the work that they love doing. And so our podcast and newsletter is for those that want to make that sustainable change in the world.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think that's very powerful. The 17th SDG that there is building partnerships to achieve the UN sustainability goals. And I think the reason that they did that was because there are so many people who have very altruistic goals, but it's such a large world and these problems are so large. So I think it's really amazing that you're trying to connect all of us. I think it's really great. So what impact do you hope to achieve through doing well by doing good?
Well, I think, from an impact perspective, we're looking to inspire people. We want to inspire people to make a change, to either join some of these companies. So a company that I work for example, One Concern, that's one example, but there's many others. So we've been interviewing companies across multiple industries, so fintech, healthcare, and we want to inspire listeners to know that, hey, you don't necessarily have to just work at a tech company or like a big tech company in order to make a difference. Because a lot of people do feel sort of disenchanted by doing that, right? It turns out that there's a lot of really great companies out there that are doing something that's positive that also, have have a really strong business. Which means that they're comparable in terms of the monetary incentives, but also are doing something positive. So we want to inspire people to join those companies, or best case, of course, is to inspire people to then start those companies. And that's a really key motivator for this. And we always ask our guests at the end to give advice to the listeners, right? If you want to start something, if you want to do something positive in the world, how do you go about it? And we get a lot of different advice, right? That some people talk about how, build a for-profit business, make sure to tie your business incentives to the mission of the company, so that all stakeholders, including employees, the stakeholders or the investors, as well as everybody else, is involved in this process. And so there's a lot of different advice that we get, and so our goal is, again, to inspire the listeners to do something, right? Get up and do something that makes them feel like they're making a change in the world.
I think that's amazing. I think if that impact is being bred, which it sounds like it is, we're definitely going to see a better world. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing. So to continue on, given the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and a plethora of other issues, we need more good in the world. How do you think startups can be an effective vehicle of change?
Well, COVID-19 has been a huge shock to the system. Whether it's, and I think once we had talked to somebody, and I think somebody had characterized it as one of the biggest shifts that they've seen since World War II. It's huge, and it's changed the way that we work as well. And climate change, as we know, is getting worse every day. 2020 was actually one of the worst years in terms of climate change. And so, and then of course, not to mention that with climate change, pandemics are also becoming more likely. So unfortunately, maybe this may not be a once in a century event like it has been in the past. So startups, however, and this is true no matter what, they've always been a driver for innovation. So there's a lot of companies, a lot of big companies, take Cisco, for example, that's, started companies out of their own company and then reacquired them because they realized that, if they give a small number of people some resources, they can actually drive innovation a lot faster than large companies. So let's take an example, right? So in the energy space, of course, there's a lot of oil and gas companies that for years, hundreds, in some cases over 100 years, right, have actually been making large profit margins while destroying the environment. Now, of course, they're starting to reform themselves and they're doing a lot of great initiatives now. But new startups are actually building alternative energy sources. They're doing that to sell to governments, private enterprises. They're sort of helping drive to a cleaner atmosphere, cleaner energy future. And at the same time, they're also creating new jobs. So the best startups are able to deliver tangible social or environmental good while delivering healthy profit margins. And that becomes the most effective because and again, this is from conversations with some of the founders that we've talked to, that there's less shareholder pushback, and the company can sustain even when the founders eventually pass the torch to subsequent leaders and CEOs. So overall, a startup can drive more innovation, right? At the same time, they're more agile. They can move mountains, right, without having to kind of have all this organizational pushback. And so that's what really that's what really gets us excited as well, because when we talk to the founders, some are earlier stage than others, some are later stage, but it's always a common theme that, hey, we are disrupting the industry, and that's true no matter what. And even if they're not doing social good, so there's a lot of startups out there that maybe you wouldn't characterize as doing social good, but they still are able to disrupt industries quite a bit. So I think it's true that startups are the best path for us to move forward in a COVID-19 future, because as things are changing at a rapid pace, the startups are the ones that can actually keep up with it, whereas large companies are struggling. And so hopefully that will be the future that takes us forward.
Well, personally, I'm sold. I think especially what you're saying about shareholders and how startups are able to move a lot quicker makes so much sense. And I personally feel a lot of hope considering all that you're saying here. So on the other side of it, what do you think the limitations are to startups that seek to do good, and how can these limitations be overcome?
Yeah, So this is also one of those questions that we tend to ask our guests, because we realize that startups do have a lot of limitations. Like, let's take out, for example, just startups that do social good in general. So startups have limited resources. So that's usually the biggest challenge. And so we've asked a number of social enterprises this very question. Right now, specifically for social enterprises, outside of the usual startup stuff, which is saying, hey, I don't have a lot of resources, there's also this, matching shareholder value to social good. And so there's a few ways to do this. You can create like a public benefit corporation where you're for profit, but you have like a sort of in the legalese, you have this clause that says, hey, you're going to do social good, and we're not necessarily just maximizing shareholder value. But in many cases, even in a C corp, if you have the right investors, if you have the right stakeholders, and they're all bought into the mission, right? They believe that, hey, if we're going to do social good, we're actually going to make more money, and so there is a match between what the shareholders care about, which is making more money, and the social good that often is driven by the founders and by the team. And so what you want to do is, and I think one of our guests characterized it as a win-win-win. And I think that's actually the biggest thing, right? If you create a win-win-win situation for everybody, that helps. So again, limitations, of course, are, you have to find that win-win-win. And let's also take a nonprofit, for example, right? So we typically haven't talked to as many nonprofits in our podcast, but and that's a good example, right? Where nonprofits can be sometimes difficult because you have to keep getting grants, right? So the grant process is not an easy process, and it is sometimes subject to the market, which means that if for example the grants are coming from individually wealthy people or large organizations, that may be the excess money that they have due to maybe a good year, right? Because they've been in the market and they have that extra cash to then donate to these funds. So again, it becomes a limitation of resources, because you have to keep you have to keep filling that well, right, of grant money. So I think that brings me to my final point, which is, how do you overcome the limitation? And I think in order to overcome the limitation, the best thing is, of course, build a sustainable business, right? Now that goes without saying, but particularly for social enterprises, it's about building a sustainable business while actually doing social good, so tying the monetary incentives to that. So for example, if I say that, the earlier example I gave of a company that takes, food waste and provides it, and we talked to a company like this actually, so this is why I'm giving the example, but food waste, and then providing that to local nonprofits. If and they make money through, the margins. Now, if I can do more of that, it's pretty clear that that I'm going to do more social good. So the idea is that, hey, make more money is tied directly to doing more social good. Or let's say a clean energy company, right? A clean energy company, the more solar panels that I sell, the better or the lower the impact to the environment, which is positive. So clearly aligned incentives. So that's the best way to kind of overcome some of these limitations.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for talking to us about it. And personally, I think you've sold everyone here on sustainable businesses. I think we all love sustainable. So this was really great. I think we've learned a lot. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Do you have anything else you'd like to say before we head out?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you and AI for Good for letting me do this, and also I want to just commend the work that you all are doing. As an AI engineer, I really believe that AI can be used for positive good, and I really hope that we can continue pushing that forward. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Of course. Everyone listen to Doing Well by Doing Good. We will link to get on the newsletter and the podcast. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.